I work in a nursing home, and my schedule consists of days, evenings, and nights. It's rough transitioning between days and nights, but everyone that works here has the same shifts, so we just get through them together. The building has about 100 residents and 3 floors. The building is shaped like an L, with a north and a south wing, and the nursing station's in the middle. The 3rd floor currently only has a few residents living there due to construction, with one of the wings completely shut down because they're ripping out the walls. Due to only a few residents being on that floor, only one nurse is required to be on duty on that floor. I've worked the night shift alone on that floor many times and never really experienced anything scary or weird. Sure, it's creepy and dark at night, but that was it. I never believed in the paranormal at all. I had the mindset that I had to see it to believe it. I'm a huge fan of true crime and scary movies and stories and true crime and paranormal documentaries. However, a few of my co-workers over the years had talked about how the 3rd floor was haunted. They'd hear knocks at night and see weird things. I was always intrigued to hear about it, but we would always just laugh it off. But that night, a few weeks ago, has really started to change my mind. I was sitting in the nursing station watching movies and playing on my phone. I had just done my rounds and had answered a call bell. I had felt off that night and constantly had that feeling of being watched. I also kept on thinking that I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The next part is hard to explain, but I'll try as best I can. As I was sitting there, all of a sudden, a shadow dropped from the ceiling and hovered over me. But by the time I realized what I was seeing, it was gone. My heart jumped and I jumped out of my chair. There was no way it would be a shadow from anything or a car passing by, as the only window looks out into the forest with nothing but trees for miles. After a few moments, I calmed down and left the nurse's station, go check on my residents. Nothing seemed amiss and none of them were awake except for the old lady at the end of the hall, watching her TV shows. As I walked back to the nursing station, I swore I saw feet or a shadow moving under the crack of the door leading to the wing that was closed for construction. I opened the door just to make sure it wasn't a wandering resident from another floor. It happens quite often. But there was no one there. I walked back to the nursing station, freaked out, still feeling like someone or something was watching me. I settled back into my chair and tried to watch TikTok videos to get my mind off of it. I was sitting with my back to the window, facing the door, after about an hour of watching videos. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:03 a.m. I remember being slightly annoyed as my co-worker had promised to come up at 2:50 so I could have a break and go out to my car to have a smoke. Unhealthy. I know. I'm trying to quit. But that night, I needed one. All of a sudden, I hear 3 knocks on the window behind me. I jumped, looked out the window, and there was nothing there. Flight mode took over, and I just darted down the hall, running into my coworker who was just coming off the elevator. Now bear in mind, I'm on the 3rd floor, which is pretty high up. There was no stairway, tree, or ladder outside that window, so it was impossible for a person to be outside knocking on the window. I immediately asked my coworker if she knocked or heard any knocking, and she said no. She could see how shaken up I was and offered to switch floors for the remainder of the shift. I was very thankful, as being on the second floor means you're with another nurse, so I wouldn't be alone. I went out to the car and had a few smokes and just tried to calm down. I talked to the nurse on the second floor and she didn't seem too surprised. She'd heard knocking up there and seen and heard things she can't explain. A lot of people have died up there. And after that night, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. I haven't ever felt fear like I did that night. And I've since worked a few night shifts up there and didn't experience anything like that again. Could it be that I was just tired? I don't know. But I won't ever forget how I felt that night. I don't think I have to say this, but I swear the story is completely true. So this happened a few years ago when I was in 5th grade going into 6th grade. I started piano lessons. I obviously hated playing piano. The organ piano player at my church offered me free lessons because my mom helped out a lot. He was a very nice man. I just hated playing the piano. My family had bought an old piano from someone my family knew, so I would be able to practice for an hour at home every day. One night, near Christmas, when my brother was at a friend's house, and my parents were at a dinner for my dad's work, I was practicing piano. The only lights that were on was in the top of the piano, so I could see the music, and the dim lights from the Christmas tree. The piano was against a wall, with my back to the door. To my right was the hallway that leads to the bedrooms, and on my left was the living room, where the tree was. There was no sound other than me occasionally hitting a key. I started having this weird feeling of dread. When I looked down the hallway, that's when I started hearing something that was creeping me the fuck out. It sounded like breathing. I kept trying to convince myself that it was just a fan, but I was still unsure. I sat at the piano and started really practicing, just in case there really was a person down there waiting for me to walk down the hall. I'd seen a few horror movies, so I knew not to move near a sound. After a few minutes, I told myself out loud that I should get some water. So I stood up and walked to my kitchen that was on the other side of the wall. I didn't have a phone in 6th grade, so I would usually use my parents' or house phone. The second I stood, I heard a small gasp-like sound coming from the hallway. I pretended not to hear it. In the biggest drawer, closest to the floor, my dad kept a few of his smaller tools and nails and stuff. I remembered seeing a large box cutter type thing. I grabbed it, then I grabbed the house phone that was in the kitchen. I accidentally grabbed the phone too hard, causing me to hit a button that let out a beep. The sound is never really that loud, but with it being nighttime and me being home alone, it was almost deafening to me. In my panicked state, I then heard a low grunt, like sound coming from the hall, then footsteps. My flight or fight instinct kicked in. Mixing with my adrenaline, I ripped open the sliding back door and ran to the side of my house, basically flying over my fence, dropping the box cutter in the process. I ran as fast as I could down the block because I could hear him trying to get over the fence. I looked back like an idiot and saw the silhouette of what I'm guessing was a 6-foot-tall man chasing me. I startled, screaming bloody murder while trying to call 911, but I was too far away from the house for the phone to work. That's when I saw one of my neighbor's light come on, and I ran over and started banging on the door. I quickly looked to see where the man was, and he started sprinting the opposite way. My neighbor let me in, called the police, and helped calm me down. I had somehow escaped with my life with only a few minor scraps and cuts on my knees and feet. When the police got to my house, they figured out how the man got in. My brother had accidentally left his window cracked open, and the man was able to cut open the screen and open the window the rest of the way. They also found a rope, duct tape, and multiple knives on the ground of the hallway. My neighbor across the street had a camera facing the road because people had been stealing mail. The police looked through the footage and found one man would watch our house for a few minutes every few hours for a week. He knew I was home alone that night. For the next few weeks, they had cops watching our house until we moved. They never caught the man, but he is the reason I now have severe anxiety and paranoia. I am shy about speaking of this because it sounds unbelievable, and I don't want it to affect my credibility in real life with other people. I do not claim to know what happened in these scenarios. I don't ascribe it to ghosts or anything specific. All I know is that things happened in my house that I cannot explain. We moved into a house built in 1980. In 1992, I had a bedroom on the top floor that always made me feel strange. I was 4 at the time. I never played in there or slept in there. I slept on the floor in my brother's room for about a year. As I got older, I got over it and started sleeping in my bedroom. Things happened in the house pretty infrequently at the time. I only really just felt as though I was being watched and ran through the house quickly at night to get into my bed. I always felt extremely exposed. I don't know why. At one point, my dad and I were in our living room playing cards. I was maybe 8 at the time. We heard what sounded like someone walking back and forth in my brother's bedroom right above us. But no one else was home. We went upstairs to my brother's room and saw nothing. We then heard the same walking in our living room where we were playing cards. So we went back downstairs to check, and no one was there. At that point, we heard in our wooden basement stairs, up and down, over and over. We checked that too, and it stopped. My dad and I both experienced this together, and neither of us could explain it. Around that time, I woke up in the middle of the night and felt this horribly depressing feeling. It was the same way the Dementors in Harry Potter would make them feel, just that all joy had been sucked away. I felt it in my soul somehow, like it was part of me. Then my body was just started shaking, like I was having a seizure. I know this sounds made up. I know it does. But my body was shaking like crazy, so I started praying, and it stopped. I was afraid to fall asleep again after that in case it could happen again. It never did. I do not have epilepsy. I was awake the entire time. I cannot explain what happened. Perhaps there's a medical explanation. I've never really looked into it. When I got older, things started getting worse. As a teenager, I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone walking up and down the stairs right outside my door. I would hear glass breaking in the living room. I would hear shuffling. I could never find evidence that things were altered in any way. No broken glass, no furniture out of place. It was bizarre. I never stopped feeling like I was being watched, but I never saw anything. I just always heard things. My dad, however, claims he saw his grandmother in her old rocking chair in our basement, and she was telling my dad he needs to straighten up. He died 2 years later. lying in my bed at night, I would be watching TV or reading, would blink without thinking about it, and in my mind I would see an image of my bedroom with different creatures. In the corner staring at me, I would blink again, and the creatures would be in my mind, standing above me or right next to me. Now I can definitely consider this as some weird psychological thing manifesting, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyway, because I would just see these absurd humanoid type things in my bedroom when I blinked. And the next blink would always have them right by me, staring. There was a very tall, bowed woman in the corner once, covered in rags and skinny as a rail. She was very hunched over, and suddenly she was towering above me. It was like a scary movie, and it really freaked me out at the time. Another was a short, little, stumpy creature with a snarling face, also covered in rags or something. So I couldn't make out its body, almost like Cousin It. Just covered in something, but not hair. And only there, and only maybe 3 feet tall. Anyway, the scariest thing that ever happened was around 1 p.m. in the afternoon one day. I was home alone. All the doors were locked. I was taking a bath upstairs. The stairs were right outside the bathroom, directly in front of it. I was just bathing and relaxing when I heard my dog making grunting sounds. She liked to sit on our stone mantel for our fireplace, and it sounded like little nails were scraping across the stone. She was grunting like she was being shoved, which was strange, but I didn't really think anything of it. Suddenly I heard what sounded like an extremely heavy something storming up the stairs. We had 14 stairs, and I only heard about 5 stomps. I grew extremely still so the water in the tub wouldn't make a sound. I then heard heavy, angry breathing right outside the bathroom door. It sounded absolutely furious, and it did not sound like a human or any animal. It just sounded like primal rage, and I can't really describe it. I'm not religious, but I started praying, because it was all I could think to do in that moment. Suddenly, it just stopped. My adrenaline must have been insane, because after a moment of being absolutely stunned, I put my towel around me and looked everywhere in my house in case there was an intruder. I checked the doors. They were all still locked. There was no one in any closet, under any bed, nothing. It was just gone. At that point, I grabbed my cordless phone and ran to the bottom of my driveway, where I called my best friend to come get me. I slept with the lights on for an entire year after that. When we moved out of that house, everything stopped. I never had another paranormal experience, and that was 13 years ago. Don't have an explanation, but I don't know if I even want one to know. My mother and 2 older brothers would visit my auntie and 3 cousins around Christmas. The whole family would get together, 2 uncles, aunties, you name it. Anyway, they lived up near Inverness in Scotland, in a place called Black Isles. It's actually a place called Cromarty, but Inverness is more well known, so I'll say that. The Black Isles were said to be used back in the day as a place where witches would meet up on Halloween and perform satanic rituals, animal sacrifices, that sort of thing. Whether or not that is true is another story. I'll get to the story now. We all rented out a holiday home just down the road from my cousin's house. It had multiple bedrooms in it, so perfect for a lot of guests. Me, one of my older brothers, and his friend from Africa were all staying in one room. They were fast asleep. I, however, was not. I woke suddenly, and I didn't know why. I scanned the room with my blurry eyes. It was very dark. I couldn't hear anything but the snores from my brother and his friend. The door to the room suddenly opened with a creak. I swear to God, I froze with fear. I didn't see anything enter through it, but as I tried to scan my eyes around the room, I started to see shadow-like figures pulsating and hovering around 2 adjacent beds, hovering and pulsating over my brother and his friend. There must have been at least 3 of these figures. The third one stood over my bed, although this apparition didn't have any human-like features except for maybe the shape of something human. I could feel like it was staring right at me. I decided then the only course of action was to turn over to face the wall and go to sleep. The morning after, I told my experiences to a few of my family members, and they joked that it might be witches that performed those rituals in the past, and generally didn't believe me, except one person, my brother's girlfriend. She told me she experienced something as well. She was only sleeping next door, and she told me she felt like something sat down on the end of her bed in the night, and she could feel the weight of someone on her legs, but nothing was there. Very frightened by this, I decided to read the guest book to see if anyone else reported anything else weird or unusual, but nothing of the sort was there. I'll never forget what I saw that night, and if you're ever up near the Black Isles or staying the same holiday home as I did, just be aware of any strange figures entering your room at night.